Today we are talking about a subject that's not very sexy, but if you don't do it, your business can struggle a lot. So operational systems. Hopefully that's what you're here for. If you're looking for a founder, like I said, it's over there. Anyway, but thank you all for coming. Let me see. Let me get my notes here. I got ahead of myself. Oh, that's right. We have to thank all the sponsors. Can you all name them by now? I don't know. Okay, we'll go through them anyway. So the title sponsors are Amazon, Capital One, Cafe, Dell for Startups, and the Downtown Denver Partnership. And obviously without our sponsors, we would not be able to do Denver Startup Week. So we do appreciate all of their investment in the events. I am Jenny Loper. I am the CEO, the Director of Operations at ZWLN Solutions. I also do some fractional COO stuff for them, contracted out. I've been in manufacturing since I was 6 years old in my dad's machine shop. I first got paid with a trip to Disneyland, so that's how you motivate the 6-year-old apparently. But in the last couple decades, I've been heavily involved in manufacturing from a career standpoint. I've set up multiple manufacturing lines, dealt with all kinds of issues that come up, and in the last, 6 years or so, I've been working a lot with startups. Most of my career has been with startups as an employee, but now I tend to work a lot with them. And see how, from the earliest stages, building that infrastructure is really important. And if the infrastructure doesn't get built, at some point, it has to get built. And it feels a lot like you're trying to put, wheels on the car as you're blazing down the highway and some things like that, which I'm sure you've all heard those analogies. And so this session is really to talk about maybe thinking about those things before you're going a million miles an hour, and trying to build a business infrastructure at the same time. Because even if you're a company of one, there are some things that you can do to build into your process and how you're thinking about your business that when you bring people on, that it will help you grow a little easier. Well, the topic today is going to be focused around manufacturing. This applies to a lot of different areas. It can apply on the human resource side around how do you onboard people. It can apply in finance and accounting, how you stay out of trouble with the IRS. Let's see, what else am I thinking about? I can talk about if you actually have a manufacturing line with OSHA and insurance and some things like that. So what we're talking about are kind of these infrastructures that are necessary for the business, and depending on what business you're building, you can kind of get caught up. I am joined today with 3 wonderful panelists. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to let them introduce themselves because they know themselves better than I do.
Sure.
Anyway, Ed.
So I'm Ed Albee, and I'm CEO of a femtosecond laser machine tool startup in Boulder. And we have a 3-year, multi-million-dollar applied research grant with the Department of Energy. That's as far as I can go. The rest is classified. We also received a Colorado OEDIT advanced manufacturing grant this past year. And then on top of that, I'm also an entrepreneur in residence for CU Boulder. So I get to mentor professors on commercialization. And if you know anything about professors and primary investigators, they're really fascinated with ideas and technology, and they don't understand the concept of solution. So I'm the devil's advocate who teaches these folks what to do. So, and I worked with Jenny 18 years ago.
Oh, it's been, it's only 18
years. Yeah. And I also started out, my dad was a tool and die maker, immigrant tool and die maker, and I worked at this machine shop as a machinist trainee. So I actually can work on a Bridgeport and do some of that stuff. But other than that, I'm a sales, marketing, biz dev, general manager. In other words, I don't know anything technical. So that's me.
Good to have you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Gina Lee DeFreitas. I am the president at IMM, or Ideas Made Measurable. We are an agency, advertising agency out in Boulder, Colorado as well. We are full service, but when I joined the agency about 15 years ago, we were just a few people thinking that we had a cool idea. So I think that's in part why I'm here today. Also, I know Toby, but we do digital advertising, website development, those Google ads, probably stuff that you guys wish you didn't have to see on the internet, but the internet is not free. So that's my world.
Hi, I'm Toby Dallas. I'm CEO and founder of PartsDashboard.com. I'm a mechanical engineer by training and career. I did about 20 years or so of product design from some industries like building hardware through to medical devices. It's probably been 10 years since I last touched a Bridgeport, but I guess, we've got a good team here. And yeah, so lately I'm working on a company called Parts Dashboard. We basically are a software tool to help small and mid-sized businesses manage all the unsexy, information behind your business, the part lists, assemblies, customers, things like that. So it's information management, infrastructure stuff, which is the topic of today's talk. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you all for joining me today. So we're going to start this conversation at the very beginning. We're going to assume that we're at the very beginning of starting a business. It's you, maybe one or two other co-founders. And thinking about right from the very beginning, what kind of data is starting to be generated? So I'm going to pose that out to our panelists. Early on, what data happens?
Well, I'm involved with a lot of early stage startups, emerging companies, and whatever. So invariably, what we're trying to do is collect enough data for market validation, customer discovery, making sure we have product market fit. So that's where I lean very heavily on. A lot of the companies that I don't presume are here because they're not really early stage startups, but you get more sophisticated in terms of product requirements documents or system, target specs, or all those kinds of good things that you put in a repository so that it's shared with everybody so you can know, okay, the market says we need to do this and it has this type of tolerance or this type of part or what have you, and can we build this? Can we make modifications? So for me, a lot of the conversations I have very early on as a consultant, as an entrepreneur in residence, are basically trying to find out, do you really have a solution? Do you have a product market fit? So my data is all about, like I said, market validation, customer discovery, all the soft type stuff, if you will. So.
Well, so in the world of digital advertising, we deal with a lot of data. So consumer data, right? So if you follow the space at all, new regulations have come into play, right? CCPA, the death of the cookie. So really understanding, how do we continue to make our advertising as effective as possible for our brands, while ensuring that we are also protecting consumer privacy. So, the data that we work with a lot is, consumer profiles. Are you male? Are you female? Do you have children? Are you likely to purchase from Noodles and Company, or are you a cyclist that wants to wear Pro Zumi when you go out on your ride? So we have to get at that data, and there are lots of aggregators in our space that do that as an agency we tap into. But also there's first-party data that we get from the brands directly. So namely, if you are a Pro Zumi consumer, you probably are on their email list. We probably have access to said email, and we need to make sure that we are treating that correctly from a privacy standpoint, but also trying to create consumer profiles around you as a purchaser, right? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, our business is to help our brands like Pro Zumi to find other customers that are likely to purchase their products. So we deal a lot with consumer data, consumer research, well, some of it aggregated, some of it first party, going through a variety of digital pipelines, et cetera. And, it's constantly changing, right? Like Google and Facebook and Amazon sort of at the forefront of data and compliance because they have to be. As an agency, we are also always needing to sort of keep up and make sure that we're adhering to best practices as well.
Yeah, and I'd say, obviously you heard from, the first two answers here are more sales kind of focused in a way, or market research focused. So, if you're building something, there's two things to worry about primarily. It's like, firstly, can I even make this thing? And the second thing is there a market for it? Can I sell it? So there's a lot of information around the market side of it. And then the other side, obviously, is the manufacturing. And this is being a maker track, you probably all hopefully have some kind of idea that you're either working on or would like to get out there and build. And so the market information, there's also the design information, right? So you're going to be creating a bunch of sketches if you're just at that stage, or CAD files, or spreadsheet analyses and things like that. And the product of those is just gazillions of files. So you can come down to this mundane level of like, I've got files galore. how do I organize them? How do I keep them straight? How do I make sure that they're, the latest one is findable? That kind of stuff.
So we touched on this a little bit, but let's talk a little bit about the tools that are in place when we're usually starting out. So again, 1 to 3 person companies, what tools are used?
I'll give you the dog and horsey stuff for a small company. Invariably, you use spreadsheets, but also, we're using things like OneDrive if you're an Outlook shop, or you're using Google Drive or whatever. In fact, our principal engineer here is being very fastidious about making sure that we're hitting all the experimental elements that the Department of Energy wants us to hit to prove to them that we are validating their statement of work. So we have a repository for all this data per se, but the critical thing for me is how do you make sense of that data? You generate so much today with machine learning and AI and what have you, but at the end of the day, it still requires a human being to look at it and go, is there a tipping point on that data? Does it make sense to have all that data? What data is sufficient? Do we need more?
And how do you organize it so you can find it again?
Yeah, so for us, we just put it on the shared drive, and like I said, for companies that are 1, 3, 5, as terrible as this sounds, I've been with companies that are 100 people that are still using, those kind of repositories. But as long as you're getting, a good net answer, a good net result, why not? You don't have to invest in ERP. I was in ERP for a while, and it's like, I would have loved to have taken your business, but you don't want to give me $3 million either. So.
Yeah, pretty similar answer. Spreadsheets for sure. You get really good with those Excel shortcuts in the early days. And now with free tools like Google, being able to collaborate within Google. Back when we first started IMM, Google was just learning how to do the collaboration thing, so it wasn't very good. So we were sort of emailing and sharing spreadsheets, which was terrible. But now Google definitely, I think, is a great option for startups. QuickBooks, from an accounting perspective, easy, cheaper solution. And yeah, I think early days, everyone's wearing multiple hats, so you do get used to things like accounting and finance and all that. I think the biggest thing from an organization standpoint is trying, and it'll break multiple times, but trying to come up with a taxonomy, like naming your files, having a folder structure, so that it is easy to find and go back. And I am OCD about versioning, right? So I'll say V2, V3, V4, as many as it takes, to really make sure we have all versions available. I think Box 2 has come on, now as a really good, cheap, effective solution for sharing, and also version control.
Just a point I'll make, I presume most of the folks here are entrepreneurial or have early stage startups or what have you. If at some point you're looking for either seed investment or friends and family or VC or whatever, you want to have a very sophisticated data room, if you will. Okay, so in that you have all the accounting related stuff, all the CRM market related stuff, all the product requirements stuff. It's going to become, the more fastidious you are at the beginning of compartmentalizing all these various areas, even from an HR perspective, the easier it's going to be for you to answer all the due diligence questions from a prospective VC. So.
Contracts folder, key.
Yeah.
All your contracts need to be in a folder.
Yeah, and so that's true not just at friends and family, but it becomes more so as you kind of move along. As you go to, if you ever get to be eligible for VC, they're going to go through everything with a very fine-tooth comb, right? So if just start off with a good folder structure, like have a legal folder, have a financial folder, break them all down so you can find everything. Because they're going to want to see all of that. So, if you're just going to do some little kind of lemonade stand business and that's where you think you're going to end it, that's fine, do your own thing. But if you really are going to grow, you kind of have to get all your ducks in a row from day one. It's never going to be easier than it is today.
Yes.
And so, get off to a good start. And it really increases the value of your company if somebody can come in and look at it and see that you're well organized. If nothing else, it gives them a good feeling that you've got some control over what you're doing.
Yeah, and I think as you're designing physical products, there's also all the design files and your bill of materials, and you talk about versioning on documentation, but versioning in hardware is critical because you can really end up in a lot of trouble if you're not sure what your revisions are. Quick story, we have a client that just came on, and they hired us because they took their design files to their expected contract manufacturer and said, okay, we're ready to get going. And the contract manufacturer said, we don't know what you're trying to make. Like, your design files are not communicating to us what your end product is. And so they reached out to us and said, can you just get our design files cleaned up so our manufacturer knows what we're doing? Well, I mean, my design team is experts at designing product for manufacturing, and they're used to kind of weeding the stuff out. And they sent the design files over, and we got the files and we're like, yeah, we don't know what you're trying to make either. I mean, we do, and so we're like, okay, send us a physical product, and we will take your data, and we're going to kind of reverse engineer against your own data what your most latest revision is. Because, I mean, part of it is they're using a lot of contractors, which is not uncommon with the startups, right? You're using contractors over here and contractors over here, usually kind of the lowest bid that you can get because you're trying to conserve cash. The problem is that all of those contractors, each of them has your latest version of the data. You don't have it. And so they can go get the data, but we're trying to piece it together. So this whole idea of having a centralized repository and organization to it, even if you're very, like the company I'm talking about is 5 people. It's not a big company. But trying to get that figured out, because you're going to be working with a contract manufacturer or a manufacturing organization that has very mature business processes, and they're expecting certain things from the design files coming in. So I'll just kind of say that for a little bit later, but that's, things to think about as you're organizing, building this. We've got to have version control. We've got to have an idea about what we're building. So I think that's one thing. One thing I do want to ask, just a kind of a quick answers on, it's not really quick, but pros and cons about spreadsheets. So, I mean, because we're going to transition into software here in a minute, but pros and cons about using spreadsheets in the early days.
So cheap. Yeah, right. Cheap. So we'll jump in. So super flexible and typically free, like cheap to being free, right? So flexibility is a big thing with spreadsheets because you can do a whole bunch of different stuff with it. Downsides, for me at least anyway, is that you have to build a spreadsheet in a way that somebody else can look at and understand what's going on with it. So, I've seen many spreadsheets that are sort of disorganized for whatever reason, often because multiple people have had a part to play in building them. I've seen plenty of spreadsheets that don't have formulas copied correctly, right? So I've seen bill of material costs that have been off by as much as 10% because somebody forgot to copy a formula down. So, spreadsheets are great, they're super flexible, they're cheap. The flip side to that is that you have to build the whole thing. So if you want to try and build an ERP system out of a spreadsheet, you can do it, but is that really what you want to be focused on? Do you want to build an ERP product in a spreadsheet, or do you want to build the thing you want to build? And plus there's poor user security, right? Somebody can just lean on the keyboard, delete a bunch of a spreadsheet out, and now you've lost some information.
Or the 3-year-old gets hold of the laptop. I had that happen and had somebody lose a bunch of data. So.
Right.
Yeah, I think spreadsheets are, it's like code, like building a spreadsheet, right? Like I deal with a lot of developers for website builds, and it's based on how you think about the world, right? The way you structure the spreadsheet. And so if you don't have good documentation on it and you're trying to hand it to someone else, they might not be able to easily understand it, and sometimes they'll try to take it and re-manipulate it into a way that they understand. And that's really hard because it's hard to create those controls within the spreadsheet. You can, but you need to know how to do it, locking cells, protecting the workbooks, etc. So, but super flexible, right? Cut a million different ways, pivot that, VLOOKUP the other thing, merging all sorts of stuff. I still very much love Excel even to this day, even with all the technology that we have access to because of the flexibility, but you do have to be careful about having that be your main tool, at least, as you grow, because if too much human error and human interpretation is involved with spreadsheets.
Right. But I'd agree, like, as an engineer, I think Excel would be my favorite piece of software that I've ever come across, right? I love it, use it all the time, but it's, it has downsides. Great place to start, really good place to start, collecting information, lists, things like that, but
So one thing Gina touched on is that you have people you have spreadsheets that come in that are intuitive to you. And so, I mean, really from the very first stage, you guys are starting to build business processes. Consciously or unconsciously, you're building business processes. And if you don't think that's true, hire a second person and find out how much business process you have that they have no idea that you're doing. So, I mean, it's just intuitive. You know, we all build business processes, whether you're intentional or not, and this, we're kind of trying to talk you into being intentional about building these business processes and kind of thinking through pros and cons, even if it's just you, because hopefully you're going to grow your business into more than just you, and bringing that second person on, if nothing else, you can kind of be like, here's how I thought about it, and here's how we're doing the thing, so at least there's some forethought as opposed to, well, this is just the way I do it type of a thing. So anyway, that's what I would say. Let's talk about what I would call the first growth stage, which is going from your company of 1 to 3, maybe 5 to 20, somewhere in there, where not having data well under control starts to cause your business to be inefficient. And so you're either spending more time having to review the quality of the data and copying, making sure that you've got your formulas copied in the right places and some things like that, and looking at that maybe the spreadsheet is not the best tool, but we don't necessarily have the bandwidth to go figure out a better tool. Let's talk a little bit about how you go from spreadsheets to that first software platform.
Well, I've gone from the ridiculous to the sublime. So I've been involved with ERP, and so consequently, and it was an ERP that was specifically designated for manufacturing. It wasn't Oracle, it wasn't, PeopleSoft or whatever, but literally this was multi-million-dollar stuff, right? So I've been involved with that, but for every company I've been with or advised that's been up to 100 people, I'm a spreadsheet guy. Sorry to say, but
You get away with that in sales, I think.
Well, but I also, Kevin knows who works with us. I set up a straw man spreadsheet for the 2 most important words you learn when you get an MBA. Does everybody know what those 2 words are? Cash flow. So what I do is I have this picture of my cash flow that is so annoyingly, you can call me Mr. Minutia, right? So I have this thing, and the woman who works for us, who does all the accounting related stuff, she fills in everything on a weekly, bi-weekly basis so that I am constantly seeing this, because without that and being in the plus, I don't have a business. I mean, literally speaking, you could be, and everybody knows this, you can be profitable but be insolvent. So Kevin knows, who works with us, that I'm like a nut job. I'm like looking, oh, we spent that over here, we had to do those printed circuit boards again. Oh man, I gotta pull from here, I gotta go over here. So I'm still a spreadsheet guy.
Fair enough. All right.
Okay.
Let me ask the question again.
Yeah. And you threw me
That's
off.
fine. I know he sent you down the path of like, oh no, stay with the spreadsheet. This is good. This is a good counterpoint. So if you're thinking about you're in the spreadsheets,
Yeah.
when do you transition out of the spreadsheet to like your first software platform?
Yeah, well, I think if you are doing super repetitive tasks, and you have to hire a dedicated person just to do that, and it's becoming so much for that person to do that you have to then hire another person to do that repetitive task, it's probably better to think about buying a more expensive tool or solution as opposed to putting that money into headcount. In general, that's what I would say is sort of the trigger. Also, I think, when I think about early stage of IMM, we eventually had to upgrade all of our HR platforms, and that was almost from we're afraid that we're missing something, we might get sued situation, right? Like,
how many employees do you have? Because that's ERISA is about 50. You got to worry about it.
Yeah, when we were at like 75, and then we grew to like 150, and we're like, ooh, we
So
need to manage benefits. We need to manage 401ks now. We need to make sure everyone has had sexual harassment training. Right? There's a lot more in there from a liability perspective. So it's almost like not necessarily cost of doing business, but fear of not doing the right thing, and end up being sued and go out of business for that reason. So there's another component when it comes to people operations and people management as to like when is it time to actually get a tool or another company that specializes in that thing to help you out.
It's a good point, because obviously we're here to talk sort of, primarily about manufacturing and operations and that kind of thing, but if you're going to start a manufacturing company, there's a whole lot of boring stuff that you have to take care of just to keep the wheels moving, everything going, and things like HR, it's keeping the IRS on site, making sure you have your accounting straight, all these sort of things. And so yeah, you really do need to have tools for a lot of different things than just your the primary focus, right? And so I think it's helpful to have somebody else invent the thing you need to use. Don't build it yourself. Spreadsheets are great. But like if you're doing your P&L or any of your bookkeeping in a spreadsheet, like just go find QuickBooks. It's $10 a month, right? Like there's no sense in doing bookkeeping in a spreadsheet. But a lot of people start off that way. But that should be your first software package that you even think about if money becomes involved in your business, right? So
How does money not become involved in your
well, exactly.
business?
So it could be that you're just doing some sort of hobby thing on your kitchen counter, you're trying to figure out a design or whatever, but the minute you spend $1 on anything, the first dollar spent should be on QuickBooks. Just formalize it, do that, keeps it all, and there's workflows in there that'll kind of help you just kind of keep things in place. But that's true of so many aspects of your business that aren't related to the primary focus of your business. And I think the point is that if you're starting to do certain base level things in a spreadsheet that aren't flexible, if they're in any way repeatable, somebody has some software out there that can do that for you, and you should just go that route.
Or also if you find yourself that needing the balance of the day to do the making, and your time is not valuable being spent on the spreadsheet management, that's probably a good sign that you need a tool to make that easier too.
Are most of the people here doing B2B? Are you doing CapEx products? Are you doing, anybody doing consumer
We
related stuff?
can do a quick thing. B2B,
Okay.
show of hands B2B. Okay.
So a lot of consumer, huh?
B2C?
Okay, so I quickly went over that and talked about spreadsheets, but I mean, the reality is, I've been an early adopter of Salesforce and some of the CRM packages, which is critical, right? I'm also extremely antagonistic towards HubSpot and some of the other things that I consider cultish, but that's just me personally. But you might want to be looking into that, especially if you're selling, if it's B2C, you want to look at the Shopify, or you're going to have to look at HubSpot, or at least Constant Contact, or at least something so you can keep that in order. But for me, a worthwhile endeavor, whether you're B2B or B2C, is picking up a Salesforce or Sugar or whomever, because what that does is it allows you to have that repository that's going to be very important for you for what they call account-based marketing, right? So that's ABM, right? So that's going to help identify what your ideal customer profile or buyer persona, what we called them when I went to school. So it really can give you a lot of information, so you're not spinning your wheels, wasting a lot of time, directing your marketing very specifically. As they say, he who aims at nothing hits it every time. So you want to be very targeted on that, and a CRM package, I'm sorry if I just said that spreadsheets is, but a CRM package is, there's an old saying by Peter Drucker that says there's only two things that distinguish a business: innovation and marketing. All the rest are costs. So put a lot of effort into innovation and marketing, and call me.
Marketing, that's me.
There you go.
Some other names: Freshworks, SalesLoft.
Oh, yeah.
A little bit cheaper
There's
options.
got to be like 10,000 CRM packages out there.
So
It's
many.
the hard part
At
because
least,
choosing
yeah.
one, but yeah.
That's
But
what we use
again,
in
like,
Sightly is ours.
Like
Oh, wow.
get QuickBooks if you have money involved, which you should. Get a CRM so you can even just keep track of who you talk to.
Klaviyo.
I think they're just like foundational to a business. Right?
Sure.
Yeah.
You guys did a good job jumping ahead to my next question, which were what are some software? So we kind of covered the CRM piece of it.
Sure.
Are there other software packages, and what would you use them for? In those early days, like freemium or free, whatever. Yeah.
From a product build perspective, do you have anything that is from a product management or? Product?
Yeah, so the hard part now is if you start getting niche things like manufacturing, for example, you'll have your CAD programs if you're designing some products, maybe ECAD or mechanical CAD, something like that. Maybe you need to organize the design. The trouble is there's not a lot of dedicated software. Certainly there's nothing that's really free that can kind of help you keep track of all that stuff. So, and by that I'm talking about your parts lists, the versions that are of them, things like change control, it's bombs, configuration management, that kind of stuff. So there's some cheaper packages, right? But if you've got probably more than 3 people designing a product, you're going to run into problems with stepping on somebody else's toes for the design. So you really need to kind of move your way into something that's like a PDM system, product data management, right?
So do you have anything that's automating the economic, looking at quantities for material purchase, when is it the right time to buy, or are there any packages?
Yeah, so that's
that can
product planning or production planning kind of stuff. And
are there any cheap ones for that? Or?
No. There's so Odoo, if anyone's interested in this is kind of in the weeds a little bit, but so Odoo.com, O-D-O-O, yeah, is good because it's an ERP system that you can buy sort of a la carte. So you can get production planning out of Odoo. And Tara, it used to be called Open ERP, which was kind of vanilla, but Odoo is weird. I think because they could buy a four-letter domain, so they went with that. But yeah, so typically you can get 2 or 3 of their functional groups for free, and then when you add the 3rd or 4th one, they start charging you pretty good money. But the hope is by that point you're stuck. But yeah, like if you're interested in just production planning, then you can get that out of it, or you can get bill of material management or something like that. I mean, they combine soup to nuts, right? They have a HR component,
Yep.
they have a CRM component,
Yep.
they have fulfillment at the other end of the stuff. So you can kind of do everything you want there, or just piecemeal it. So you can do fulfillment at a ShipStation, right? You don't need to spend $2,000 a month at Odoo. But if you just want to do production planning, you can get that and potentially for free. So that would be the go-to if you're going to try and look for small things. Yeah.
And throw out everything in the last year with the supply chain issues.
Yeah.
True,
It's
yeah.
been unbelievable.
It does do inventory management, yeah. So there's the whole thing. You can do production planning, but job control, there's inventory management, channel management, I think.
We use them for CRM, time tracking, pipeline tracking, revenue opportunities.
Yeah. And like again, the best part is that it's a la carte.
Yeah, so they
Yeah.
basically they have modules that you can buy depending on what you need for your business.
So Toby, I'm
It's
going to
kind of built like a spreadsheet though. Like the UI is not very sexy in my opinion.
Well, we were talking about not sexy things, so
It's
it's
manufacturing, right? It's all about this function over form. Come on.
Yeah, okay,
If
whatever.
it works,
That's
who
right.
cares what it looks like if it does what it
There
needs
you
to
go.
do?
So Toby's been really modest. He actually has a platform that he's developed for Parts Dashboard that manages bill of materials, inventory lists. Goodness, my brain is going. Inventory materials, parts revisions, and some things like that. And it's actually very low cost. But you can talk to them after about that. But it does go in there. I mean, I've used it on and off for several years as well. But if you've got a physical product and need to keep track of revisions, and you've got a team of people, bill of materials, or even buying inventory, it's a pretty decent product. So I'll put that out there, and you can chat with him later.
But it doesn't do CRM.
It doesn't.
or
You're right.
production
It has
planning
its
or
limitations.
fulfillment or anything.
Yes.
It's more just about kind of keeping track of your design, versioning, that kind of thing. So.
Yeah. Okay, great. Let me see where we are on time. Yeah, we got a few more minutes. All right, I want to shift in a little bit and talk more specifically about design documentation. And so if we're talking about physical products and bill of materials, if we say BOM, we're not talking about something that blows up. We're talking about bill of materials. We're just lazy and say BOM. So
What's a bill of materials? Show of hands. Is this jargon? Like, is this way too inside baseball?
no,
Bill of
okay.
materials?
Bill of materials.
Costed bill of materials.
So show of hands. Does anyone know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think so. Pretty
Most
good.
people, bill of materials. It's just the list that shows everything that goes into your product and where it fits and what quantities and things like that.
Yeah, good. Thank you for that. That was good. So I want to talk a little bit about what is design documentation. We're going to go with obviously bill of materials, but then also like what if you're trying to build a physical product that is probably made up of more than one element, more than one item. How do you keep track of those raw materials that go into it? How do you keep track of all the assembly pieces and whatnot? And so like what is that design documentation that we're talking about to communicate to a manufacturer?
Don't look at me.
Don't look at you. I'm gonna look at Toby because I know that he knows. I know
Right,
that he.
so let's just say you've got an idea, and this is something that, that Jenny's company this is their niche, right? So you come to somebody with a design, you've either got just the notion of a product, or you've got a fully designed out product, but you can't make it, because going ahead and actually making something physical, it's a very big step, right? So designing something, easy, you can do that nights and weekends in your basement. Making something is a very big thing, especially if it's hardware that involves electronics. The costs are enormous. So a lot of people go to a contract manufacturer. You don't have to build your own factory. These exist all over the world. So contract manufacturer, CM, they want to know what you're making and how to put it together. So ideally you would have two-dimensional CAD drawings, very old-fashioned, but still sort of, I guess, the lingua franca of manufacturing is this 2D CAD drawing. Every single part designed out, you'll have assembly drawings, all this kind of stuff, so you'll have this design package. You should have sort of process documentation, put this thing into this thing using some amount of glue or whatever. You'll have quality control information, so you'll have documentation that basically says, how do I assess this thing has been good or bad, right? So you'll have to say, okay, well, whatever that is it just dimensional? Is it some functional tests? You'll have to have information about packaging. You'll have to have regulatory stuff, right?
Especially if you're doing lasers or
FCC and anything at the
exactly.
broadcast, you got to have
right.
the labels on.
If it's electrical, it has to go through UL. If it's going to be software, I shouldn't say it has to, but by and large, electrical things here, you have to go through UL if they get plugged into a wall. I don't know. There's probably
TV if it goes to Europe.
TV in Europe and get the C mark and all that kind of stuff, right? So there's all this regulatory stuff you've got to worry about. But to get to your CM, like how do you build this thing, right? And then so it's the design documentation. You also have to have an idea of quantities. You have to have that pretty well planned out. It's hard to even talk to a contract manufacturer if you don't really know how many you're going to make. And if I'm going to make 10 of this thing a year, you have to be aware of the fact you could well be below threshold for them, right? You can't go to talk to Foxconn if you want to make 100 little plug-in devices.
Not happening.
No, right, exactly. So that comes back to your marketing. So you have to have a pretty good market analysis beforehand. I mean, obviously it's all guesswork, but you have to sort of have an idea of where you're going to find your right CM. Where are they going to be? Are they going to be in the US or Mexico, or are they going to be in East Asia somewhere? So.
Just a quick question. Are two standard documents for that process, like a product requirements document and a marketing requirements document? Or could you touch on, for some of those who maybe don't have that experience, what are some of those defined, standardized documents that the manufacturers look for?
So marketing requirements document means that you've gone out and you've interrogated the marketplace, and they have a specific needs around tolerancing, size, ease of use, this, that, and the other thing, right? So you take that information and you go to your product designers, product developers, and they'll work with you on a product requirements document. And that, unfortunately, what happens in that process is that there are certain things the marketplace wants that may not be doable, right?
The marketplace always wants a time machine.
Exactly. So what happens is that, so your engineers, your scientists, whatever, you'll look at all this stuff and say, I know you want, 3 microns of, tolerance, but I can only give you 10. Well, that could be a tipping point for whether or not the marketplace wants it, right? So everything has to work very cohesively, if you will. And a product, I have one on my computer that I can show, but a product requirements document, even though I'm the marketing guy, I was in charge of the engineering and the product introduction, and we'd meet each week, and we'd go through this 20 or so page document to make sure that everything was still valid. There were no changes in the marketplace. There were no changes on the engineering side. So real critical, real critical.
I think what I would say is that your marketing document feeds your product requirements document, and that you give to your engineers, because your engineers are going to be designing against that product requirements document, and the output from your engineers are going to your contract manufacturers.
Cool.
Did that help the train a little bit?
Right, and your contract manufacturer doesn't really care a bit about your marketing stuff, right? Because you're just going to pay them, dollars per hour, dollars per unit to make the thing and get it to you. But you have to have the confidence that you can sell all the units that going to get made at whatever the product requirement spec demands.
Any other questions at this juncture? Sorry.
I would just say thank you.
Okay, Pat. Any other questions? Yeah.
For versioning, do you guys like GitHub or?
Like GitHub?
Well,
GitHub.
it's good for software.
Yeah.
That's kind of it.
So we use GitHub at IMM for like website builds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So
So
you
you
can,
have multiple developers working on different pieces, right? They
Yeah.
can join and get into GitHub.
right, and you can sort of hack it in a way or use it in different kind of ways. For doing sort of mechanical things, you can keep track of builds without putting any content behind the metadata. But it may not be the best thing for mechanical. There are specific mechanical tools for version control. But yeah, GitHub is good for electronic content in a way.
Okay. Yeah.
So shameless plug for anyone that wasn't at the makerspace session yesterday, but you mentioned minimum quantities and getting involved with contract manufacturers can be cost prohibitive to start, but there's a lot of opportunities in makerspaces to do initial run design, like prototyping, or even short run stuff. So whether it's here in Denver or up in Tinkerbell, granted your mileage may vary, they may or may not have the equipment that you need, but chances are you can find someone who can connect you with the tool or the knowledge that you need. So leverage makerspaces, and especially when you're doing your initial prototyping design.
And actually, the Front Range actually is a really good place for doing hardware, especially there's lots of electronics manufacturers that'll do small scale board runs and things like that for you.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the data that goes to the contract manufacturer. We kind of went down that path a little bit. So we've talked about you need to have your electronic CAD files, your bill of materials, your assembly drawings, and that type of thing for your contract manufacturers. One other thing that I think every one of our clients who walks in our door that has to do, that's a young startup company, is part numbering. And so how do you do, contract manufacturers live off of part numbers. I mean, when I have been on manufacturing lines, I can talk to you in almost just numbers, and just like and thes might be added into the sentence, but I can pretty much give you a conversation in just numbers, because when we're talking about a thing, a widget or whatever, you don't want to use the description, and sometimes things are so closely designed that they're pretty similar, like, is this a screw, is this a bolt? I mean, maybe, but what if it's a 1/2 inch screw or an 1 inch long screw? You can't just say the screw anymore, and you get tired of saying the 1/2 inch screw or whatever. So let's talk a little bit about part numbering, and we're not going to go down the rabbit trail of smart part numbers or dumb part numbers. If you want to have that conversation, see us afterwards. We're not going to bore you with that.
And this sounds goofy.
So-
This sounds really goofy, but I had a terahertz manufacturer that I was with. These are $300,000 pieces of gear, and literally they had approximately 250 types of fasteners in their system, right? And that's because someone wasn't smart enough to say, all right, could we get by with this or that or whatever. So what happened is that goes all into your costed bill of materials, makes it higher. So then if you got a president of the company that's an accountant, he wants to build everything off of cost, right? As opposed to what market demand for pricing is. So you've put yourself out of business to some degree by increasing your DM and DL, so excessively, because you didn't have the control over these seemingly innocuous little stupid things like a 1/4 inch versus a 3/8 versus a whatever.
Oh my God, yes, absolutely.
So part numbers must be the most mundane thing to talk about in terms of manufacturing.
We are not, we're a very unsexy conversation.
Very, very much, yeah. So every single thing needs to have a part. It's an identifier, right? It's a social security number for something. Every little component, raw material, sub-assembly, assembly, finished good, all that kind of stuff needs to have a unique identifier. And so it just needs to have a number, some kind of thing. It could be alphanumeric, alpha. Well, it's kind of weird, but mostly it's just numeric. There is this thing called smart part numbers, where you have this, this long old number, and you try and encode some knowledge into the number. Or you just have a dumb part number that starts at 1 and just counts up as you go along. So it's a pretty much religious divide or religious argument as to which of these two is better. And again, so if you're interested, we'll have this afterwards. But just know that everything needs a number, a unique identifier.
And I think one thing that's confusing too, especially when you're making something with electronics, if you go buy a resistor from DigiKey as an example, it has a part number. You have a DigiKey part number. You can use the DigiKey part number. When you take your product and give it to a contract manufacturer, let's just talk about like a a 1K 1% resistor. If that means something to you, it does. If it doesn't, then it's fine. But let's just go with that's what it is, a 1K 1% resistor. Very mundane, boring thing. That is in millions, billions of products. And so when you go to a contract manufacturer, how do they keep track of your inventory on that resistor compared to their other 75 customers or whatever? And so what they do is they will actually, if you don't walk into that contract manufacturer with your part numbers being numbered for you, they will give you part numbers. They will assign them in their system and give you a part number. And it's probably very common is the first 3 letters of your company's name plus a sequential 5 to 7 digit number. And so they'll take the DigiKey part number and give it its own part number. I've seen startups do this, and it's fine to do that. But in terms of like keeping control of your own stuff, if your contract manufacturer is building your part numbering system for you, you no longer have control over that. You don't get to dictate, when that part is revised necessarily, and some things like that. So I just keep that in mind. That early on, back when you're like just very small company, if you're starting to build things, start with a part numbering system. And so I'll just put that. Anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, right. And so you can use a DigiKey part number for something. DigiKey is probably also providing the manufacturer's part number for it. They might provide, if you want to look for a 1-1 resistor, there could be 5,000 different resistors inside the DigiKey that match that, right? And so you got to figure out, like who's the supplier for what are your alternates, all that stuff. But if you just give it, my 1%, 1 ohm resistor, 1K resistor is part number 027. Okay, great. Now you can at least identify, you can tell your contract manufacturer, because this is really important when it comes to version control. So because then you have this number, 023, whatever is your resistor, and now I've versioned this to be a different kind of thing. So I've gone from version 1 to version 2 to version 3. At the component level, it doesn't feel so important, but when you get to an assembly of some kind of things, you can tell them, this assembly is made up of all these different variations of the components. You can't put version 2 in here. It requires version 3 for it to be compatible with all the other things. And so you have to be able to convey this information, not only to your contract manufacturer, but around your building, within your team, so that everyone knows what the design is made up of.
Now you know why all the young entrepreneurs are focused on smartphone apps. Because all this other stuff. And I just read something the other day that there's over 100,000 SaaS products out there, or companies even.
That's it.
I was like, so software really did eat the world.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, fine.
Software is much easier, and there's a reason why people say hardware is hard. I mean, it's the minutia of details that are so important to your business to keep track of when you're talking about changing things. If you send parts in, well, it's going to move into changing anyway, and so if you send parts in, revisions, good idea. Again, if you don't put revisions on your product, guess what? Your contract manufacturers are going to be like, and this is the first bill of material we receive, everything is revision 1. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not true. Maybe it matters to you that it's that way, or maybe it doesn't. But I think the thing is, when you get that first build, that first board, or that first assembly back from your manufacturer, and you start doing testing on it, guaranteed you're going to find something you want to change. Especially if you give it to an engineer, because you can't give an engineer anything, and they're not going to want to change it. So, and I'm an engineer, so I can at least say that about them. Yeah. And so when you get that back,
change for the better, though, right?
Yeah. Well, we hope so.
That's the whole point.
We hope so.
Yeah.
But so if you want to start making a change on it, then how are you going to how do you communicate that to your contract manufacturer? Because what you don't want is your contract manufacturer building your old revision that has problems, instead of the new one that you hope you've solved the problems. Or worse yet, you don't want some of your stuff built on this old set that isn't going to fit inside this new one. So keeping track of these revisions is really important.
And they form the basis of your contract with your contract manufacturer. Like if you make an order for a certain number of things, you're going to put this thing in this version, and then that tells them that's what you've obligated yourself to buy and you're wanting them to make. And so if they provide something different, then you can go back and say, hey, look, I ordered this thing, you gave me this thing, I'm not paying for it, you got to fix it, whatever it is. But if you don't tell them what version of something to make, then they can send you whatever they want. And that's not an uncommon problem. Yeah. So versioning is important, not just so you get the right product, but also so that you can actually legally refuse the wrong product. Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a break here for questions at this point. Anything coming up? Yeah?
I don't know
using like a 3PL or something like that, you mean? Yeah. So is this a product that you're going to make yourself, or you're literally just somebody else is going to make it, you're going to buy?
Well, contract manufacturers, and then from there so it's giving it to people.
I mean, depends on what kind of organization, how big you want to build. If you want to keep yourself as small and nimble as possible, then have a CM send your stuff straight to a 3PL and fulfill from 3PL directly if you can. Yeah, that's great.
I think it comes down a little bit too to what kind of control that you want to have and what you want your core
Quality.
competency to be, and quality too.
Right, because are you going to inspect the thing along the way? Is the key thing, right?
Right, that's actually a really good point, because if you're using a 3PL, there's actually a group here in Colorado that, here in Denver actually, I've been in their facility several times. They're a 3PL service, and they also do product testing and product rework. And so if something gets out into the field that's either a design issue or a quality issue that escaped the production floor, then if you're shipping it yourself, you have more control about when things stop shipping than if you go to 3PL. 3PL is always going to be a communication to somebody else that hopefully sees the email before the next shipment goes out, right? There's also going to be the cost associated with it. So, I mean, you're paying your own people to possibly go in and do some rework. The 3PLs will charge you for space. They'll also charge you for labor if they do the rework. Not all 3PLs will do rework. Some of them will be like, we're just a dumb shipper, so you send us the stuff and tell us who it goes to and we will ship it out. We're not going to tell you good or bad. So, I mean, I think there's probably more questions about like, what do you want to be when you grow up? What type of risk do you want to assume? And those types of things. So I think that, I mean, in the grand answer from all consultants is it depends.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
but hopefully that gives you a little framework to think about the depending part.
If you're just buying coffee mugs from here and selling them through eBay or something, or Amazon or whatever, then maybe you don't need to see those coffee mugs in between. But if you've designed something and you're having it made overseas or anywhere really, certainly as you're starting out, you probably want to have a high confidence that they're good, which means you have to see them yourself and not just rely on somebody else telling you that they're good, because you'll often get told that they're good when they aren't.
It depends. I mean, if you build really robust test systems at your contract manufacturer that are going to minimize your quality escapes, you can probably do it that way. Oh, come on.
So everything costs you.
Leave
It's
your
like, do you
wallet.
want to pay?
Yeah, I know you do.
Remember the optical
Oh, I know.
transceivers?
I know.
Do you want to pay employees to do it, or do you want to pay somebody else's employees to do it, right?
Yeah.
And just know that if you're paying somebody else's employees, there's a commission going along on that. So, but if it's easier for you, maybe that's the way to do it. But if you're doing that, you just got to always have this mindset of like, what's my quality assurance that's happening along the way.
Any other questions? Okay, we'll keep going. Let me see where we are on time. A few more minutes, we'll be fine. How about, we've talked a little bit about this on accurate documentation. Are there any stories that you guys have about product that shipped or designs that happened when the design documentation wasn't accurate? You want to share any of those stories?
I think you probably have one from when we were.
I know, but you can tell it though if you want.
You mean the one in Wichita? That was.
Well, I don't remember that one.
Okay.
You can tell that one.
Yeah, we had a humongous shipment going to a company in Wichita, and it was at the end of the month, end of the quarter. We're trying to make some numbers because we were a company that was really struggling, and so we were trying to prove to our investors that we could survive. And literally, we had a major faux pas, and it was decided at the 11th hour that an unacceptable, the AQL, or the acceptable quality level, was going to be a bit high. And so the CEO came to me and he's like, "Hey Eddie, this is not looking good, And he's like, the quality is probably going to come out at a 18% return or this, that, and the other thing." He's like, "But I want to make the quarter. Should we send it out?"
I didn't know this backstory.
Oh yeah.
Oh my goodness, all right.
I said, "Not on your life, okay?" I didn't last at the company that much longer after that, but I was like, no. If it's one thing to know that you're sending out stuff that you think is fine, right, and it comes back and it gets returned because there's a defect or what have you. But if you knowingly send out stuff that you think is going to have an unacceptable quality or return, you are just a bad guy. So anyway, so that's,
Well,
it
and
does happen.
I think that I will say this too. I mean, if you're as a startup, you have your name and your brand is everything. And so if you knowingly send bad product out, I mean, that can be a death knell to the business. And so
You're gonna make your
It's-
numbers in the quarter, you're gonna, look somewhat good, but then,
just
boy,
wait till the next quarter.
hell to pay.
Just did that this weekend.
Yeah.
I called, don't send.
Don't send, yeah.
But you're still employed, right?
I didn't say.
So far.
You're
I'm not firing myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Question in the back.
I'm not sure if this is related, but especially when you're a new company developing a new product, do you guys recommend pre-selling the product before getting it manufactured or things like that? Or
Sure, why not?
Well,
Yeah, get some revenue.
so, okay,
At least
so.
get- at
I'm
least
going to
get the
repeat
promise
the
of
question for
revenue.
being
Yeah.
recorded.
Yeah.
So the question in the back is, do you recommend pre-selling the product before you're manufacturing it? Is that a correct representation?
Like Kickstarter, basically, is what you're saying.
build cash flow?
Indiegogo.
Build cash
Yeah,
flow?
Indiegogo, yeah.
Okay. And I'm going to put, this is yours. I'm sorry. This is all you.
Wow, okay, first of all, so you've decided that you have product market fit.
Yes.
Okay, so it's been validated, you've done all the customer discovery, you've interviewed 50 people, you've done all the interrogation, you know this, that the market needs this, and you have a differentiated value proposition, that no one else can meet the need.
Okay, maybe not the second part. An idea and a concept, and so instead of spending all this money, you want to create a website, lead people to it, and see if there's actually a value there before you even manufacture anything.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, that's fine. I mean, if you feel consciously or if you feel ethically that, this is something that's, better than sliced bread and all that good stuff and is going to solve a need that is not being met in the marketplace, fine, sure. Why not? I mean, that's fair. I mean, it's not like you're being
Pre-sale.
disingenuous. It's not like you're doing, taking the money and going to bowing,
Make it clear that it's pre-sale, doesn't exist yet, or whatever you have to do, but,
Can't
Yeah.
recognize the revenue
Right.
anyway
Right.
until you deliver. So, I mean, that's the other thing.
well, it's cruel accounting.
That's it. Which is FASB. I mean, there are some gap.
It's entirely possible he's doing cash accounting, but.
Yeah,
it's a-
we've actually partnered with several startups that have, they have backing, but they want to take the Indiegogo or, what's the other one?
Kickstarter.
Kickstarter.
Kickstarter, yeah.
I was like, that's not the right one.
No.
Yeah, Kickstarter route, and they want, basically they come to us because they need help with the website piece of it and knowing that they're gonna drive traffic through some of those avenues. So it's not uncommon. I don't know as much about like the
Look up-
fulfillment part of it, but like
Look
the
up
marketing
Pebble
part
Watch.
of it.
Look up Pebble Watch, the history of Pebble.
Yeah.
My
Coolest
husband was so
cooler.
sad. Pebble.
Huh?
Or coolest cooler.
Yeah.
The coolest cooler.
The coolest cooler.
Never heard of that one.
No, never heard of it.
That was a huge success, if you will. But then when it came to the fulfillment side, it flopped.
Yeah, I've heard too many horror stories.
But then they
Pebble
they feel
really,
better.
yeah, Pebble kind of went in the toilet. In fact, my son was an early in on Pebble, and he kept telling me, "Hey, Dad, we got to get in." I'm like, yeah, you go ahead.
Right, so there's two ways you can do it, right? You can go to Kickstarter or Indiegogo, and I think it's almost implicit that if you're trying to advertise a product there, the whole idea of that is your product doesn't really exist. You're trying to gather funding to get it built. Hopefully you have a prototype that works and that kind of stuff, right? So people go to those places, they buy through them, they should know what they're getting in for. There's obviously established businesses that misuse Kickstarter to try and promote stuff, and I find that objectionable, but okay. And then the other side is that you just build a completely standalone website that says, hey, I'm selling this thing, buy it here, but it's going to have some fulfillment timeline, right? Like if you're still trying to gather money to build the product somewhere, then you can't deliver that immediately. Somebody buys something, there's an expectation that it's going to ship in 3 to 5 days. So obviously, if that doesn't happen, they're going to be pretty upset. So as long as you, I think, make it clear that this is,
Yeah,
something I'm working on, then why not?
Yeah, the benefit of Kickstarter and Indiegogo could go viral, all that stuff.
Yeah.
If you go the full.com, like just do it yourself, pre-sale makes a ton of sense, right? And you usually have to offer something, right? Like if you buy from us now, it's not gonna ship till Q4, but if you buy from us
Throw in a
now,
hat.
yeah, give you a free hat or give you a discount or the free whatever
Yeah.
thing. And again, I agree, like as long as you're being very transparent with the consumer,
'Cause you
And
want
I think as
validation.
a startup, like, you know, putting your own story in front of the consumer, why are you doing this? Why does it matter? What makes it different, right? You are your company's brand in the beginning, is super beneficial as well.
Because you might just think you want to produce 1,000 units, but after the pre-sale, you're at 10, 12,000, right? So it's a different story.
Nice, that's a nice story.
That is a nice story. I was gonna say, the other way is you think you're gonna produce 1,000 units and you get like 10.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that's a very different story too, so.
I was gonna say, like, probably along the same lines, I did the same last month, the problem I ran on inventory, and I have a Shopify site, and they have a plugin for pre-orders, and it was super easy, just the transparency to the consumer saying like, I'm fresh out, but here's $2 off for anybody that's willing to wait until, I don't really know when, but.
Right.
And then really good success out of it.
That happened to me on these compression socks I saw on Shark Tank. And it's like, you know, the ones I wanted are not gonna be available. This was back in February or March. And the socks I wanted were not gonna be available because I hike a lot, I do a lot of stupid stuff. But anyway, so there wasn't gonna be available till October, but they wanted all my information and all my credit card. And I'm like, really?
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah,
think
that's
so.
not- yeah.
Okay.
Question in the back?
Yeah, just one more thing to think about as well. So I just took a company through production with a piece of hardware, and like marketing to drive people to whatever platform you're using to do pre-sale can be super expensive. So oftentimes that can sort of offset the upside to doing your pre-sale, and so that's one of the benefits of your indie goes out there. They do a lot of the marketing for you, but if you're doing it yourself and you have to drive that demand yourself, then that can really make that. On that note as well, sorry, shameless plug. I am no longer associated with my previous company, and I've been steeping in this world for 2.5 years. And so, if there are people who need help in this area, particularly contract manufacturing, product development, I'd love to chat with anybody afterwards. I'm free right now.
There you go. Shameless plug, shameless plug. That's all right.
Very shameless.
It was worth your time. Huh?
All right.
I did just want to add a little bit to that. I love so the current landscape, as we all know, there's more dry powder, and the VCs are starting to, or investors, period, are starting to, you know, start writing checks again. But over the last 8 months, within, you know, let's say the last quarter, we had a shift where it wasn't much so founder friendly, but investor friendly. And they always say like sales cure all. So if you can A, grab some of those sales, and then B, form that traction or critical milestones, you're going to get a better valuation. Your cap table is going to look better. You're not going to be as diluted, especially if you've already taken friends and family with you. So just another piece to kind of this multifaceted system, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everybody.
So kind of a little rabbit trail off of there, but I think the big question I'm going to pose to this is this thought. So if you do pre-sales, how are you going to keep track of them? You're going to keep them in a spreadsheet, you know, and all this kind of stuff? Because I know. Thank you. I have to get it back on track. Yeah. So I'm keeping a spreadsheet, and then obviously if you're going to have all this personal data like credit cards and things like that, spreadsheets may not be the most secure form to do that. I'm just going to throw that out there. So I think we're gonna probably call it here.
Yeah.
Any final words on topics around operational systems and foundations before we wrap up?
I'll give you an old.edu statement here to end it. If you're going into esoteric, hard tech, high tech, deep tech, know this: 70 to 90% of those startups fail within 5 years. So make sure you go into this with the right expectation. Build your 5 to 7 year pro forma, which is MBA for gas. Build it properly. Make sure it's fully vetted, and and then just be careful. And I have a son, by the way, who is a wildly successful entrepreneur who didn't listen to me at all. So,
So there's that piece. So
yeah.
okay, excellent.
So,
All right.
but he's my son, so.
Yeah.
The little caveat.
Okay.
Oh, what?
No, you're good.
Anything
All right.
you wanna say?
Anything you want to say at the end here? Otherwise,
could use
I
this
guess just
session.
from a marketing perspective, right, like leverage your story, right, be authentic, be transparent, share yourself, right, like that's what consumers want. There's, it's hard to differentiate on product attributes alone. Brands brand does matter to the consumer, but also know that consumers are not very loyal to brand either.
And know that nobody wants to buy a 1/4-inch drill bit. They want to buy a 1/4-inch hole.
Yeah,
Fair enough.
what job are you getting done for the consumer?
Right? The jobs to be done perspective, which is very worthwhile read if you're into that. So.
Version control. Simple as
That's
that.
what you got, version control, 2 words, very
The
good.
engineer speaks.
There you go. All right. Well, I want to thank you all for coming. I've got a little bit of swag on the back table if you want it. I'll put this out there. If you're thinking about developing a hardware product, there's a small version of these. There's a big version of these. This walks through all the steps on how to do hardware development. So that's that. Anyway, thank you all for coming. Hopefully you got something useful out of this and built your foundations while you're still a person of one.
Good luck.
Hello.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.